Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be providing an update to the bull market support band. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, of course, we do have a new weekly close, and therefore it is often prudent to provide an update to the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA, even though we don't do it every single week. It does seem like because we recently had weekly closes below it, we should follow it at least on a weekly basis for right now. So you'll see that a couple weeks ago we had our first weekly close below the 20-week and the 21-week, the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA for the first time since the beginning of January, and this was a red candle. So in fact, this was the first red candle that closed the weekly candle below the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA for the entirety of 2023, right? Now, if you remember, our thesis that we've been following this year is that, well, Bitcoin will likely spend about half the year going up and half the year going down. And our expectation was that, that April was sort of marking the beginning of a summer lull. We ended up basically dropping into the summer. And then in June, we sort of popped back up to sweep these highs, right? So we just swept the highs all the way back up here. We've then now come back down to at least these local lows. But again, the expectation that we've discussed for this year is that Bitcoin would spend about half the year going up and half the year going down. And it is fascinating that when you think about it, right? I mean, at least at this point, this top, assuming it is the top, occurred in about early to mid-July, right? Almost about halfway through the year, in fact. So I thought it would be interesting if, we look back on this and, you'll see Bitcoin going up for half the year, and maybe by the end of the year, it'll be obvious that then Bitcoin went down for half the year, right? I mean, it's hard to say for sure. And of course, the path there is going to be very, very uncertain. And even though we spent the first half of the year going up, which is what we said the likely scenario is spending half the year going up and half the year going down, there were certainly some scares along the way. In the same way, if we do spend the second half of the year going down, it might not be straight down. In fact, it's more likely to not be straight down. You might have a scenario where you sort of do the reverse of what we did over here, right? So over here, you would sort of go up very, very quickly, and then you would basically do nothing for a few weeks, right? Or even a couple months, and then you would move again. You could see something play out like that again, where Bitcoin comes down, we do nothing for a while, maybe we backtest a 20-week SMA, and then we go lower again. Again, this is my expectation for the year. It might not play out, right? I mean, the thesis of half up, and half down, it's just a thesis. It doesn't have to play out. I don't know if it's going to play out, but we've provided as much evidence as we can for it, and I'd like to think that so far it has more or less met our expectations. One of the reasons that made us consider a half up and half down year are the similarities that we've saw in prior cycles. And in fact, how Total 3 was sort of advertising weakness in the market. If you don't remember what I'm talking about, if we go look at total market cap, you can see that we've only really just moved below the 20-week moving average. I mean, except for this fake out over here, we only just now moved below it. What's interesting, though, in terms of the summer lull, Bitcoin swept the highs, but the total market cap did not, right? And we didn't even make it back up to these highs. So the only thing that was really moving to new highs out of the major large caps was mostly just Bitcoin, even ETH. I mean, even Ethereum did not take out its April high. So it really does show you that the weakness in the market was identified much longer ago, right? Long ago, back, in Total 3 could not hold. And we suspected back then that the altcoin market would not hold. And the reason we said that was because the social risk is still putting in new lows, right? Higher or lower highs and lower lows. And if the social risk is going lower, then who's the marginal buyer of your altcoins, right? Because if you buy an altcoin, the expectation is that a lot of people want to see the price go up, right? Let's be honest. You're not here for the community. And if the expectation is the price goes up, then how can that expectation be met if people are leaving the space, right? And we talked about this with the social risk, right? So the social risk back over here, we saw it was putting in lower highs and lower lows. And our expectation was that altcoins get wrecked, right? So Bitcoin goes up for half the year and goes down for half the year, but altcoins get wrecked either way. And what's again interesting is how a lot of altcoins have gone on to put in new lows, even though Bitcoin's well off its low, right? So you have this example here where Bitcoin has only corrected back to where it was back in June. Some alts are already putting in new lows again, you know? I mean, they're already putting in new lows again. And Bitcoin is still at 26K, right? So when you think about what the altcoin market accomplished in the first half of the year when Bitcoin was in a risk-on environment, what happens to altcoins if during the second half of the year, Bitcoin trends lower? Okay? And that is the reason why, I mean, I've said before, I think the altcoin market is far too risky. If they can't perform when Bitcoin's going up, then how the hell are they going to do well when Bitcoin's theoretically going down? So, and again, you can see that we sort of discussed this idea that actually did come to pan out, was that if Bitcoin bounces off the 20-week, if it bounces, then it would likely lead Total 3 back testing the 20-week SMA, which is exactly what it did. I mean, this bounce here by Bitcoin in mid-June led Bitcoin to a new yearly high. And that bounce by Bitcoin in mid-June allowed the altcoin market to retrace basically all of this drop, only for those to eventually just be wicks on the news of the Ripple and the SEC case. Remember, we came out with a video on that day and said, guys, this is likely nothing more than a wick. We could easily close this week back below the 20-week moving average. And so now, after sort of taking inventory of what happened, we can say, all right, well, Bitcoin bounced and Total 3 got rejected. It's a pre-halving year, right? I mean, what do you expect from the altcoin market? That's what it does in pre-halving years. I mean, the altcoin market just sucks in pre-halving years for the most part. Yes, you're going to find some altcoins here and there that can go in nice little trends and people get excited about them. But at the end of the day, the collective altcoin market has just put in one lower high after another. So the reason some of these altcoins have moved higher is not because new money is coming into the space. It's just because people are moving money around from one altcoin to another. But these are just a series of lower highs. And it has been since November of 2021. You might say, well, this is a higher low. And it is for now, admittedly, but I would argue that Total 3 will likely fall back in and at the very least retest these lows, and a good chance of us actually taking out those lows. And remember, Total 3 could take out these lows even if Bitcoin doesn't, right? So if you think about where Bitcoin is now and where Total 3 is now, I mean, Total 3 is only 11% off the low. Right? I mean, another 11.5% drop puts Total 3 back at the low. And that's including another 10 billion or 15 billion of market cap they added to Total 3. But still, I mean, if we just ignore the noise, say about another 11% drop gets Total 3 back to the December lows. But an 11.5% drop by Bitcoin gets it nowhere near the prior lows, right? I mean, an 11.5% drop, I mean, that just puts Bitcoin at 23K, right? Which is not, for Bitcoin to get back to the prior lows, it needs to drop 41%. So in a world where if Bitcoin does drop 41%, which I mean is a possibility, right? I mean, it's a possibility. It's possible. Okay? I mean, go ask 2015 and ask if it's possible, and it'll tell you it is. But if Bitcoin drops 41% and Total 3 is only 11.5% off the low, then where does that leave the altcoin market? If Bitcoin drops 5%, the altcoin market could already be at the prior lows, right? Because when Bitcoin drops, usually the altcoin market drops more. They're riskier assets. So I think our understanding, or sort of reflecting back on this, I think our understanding of how we've used the altcoin market to sort of get an idea of what Bitcoin's going to do has worked out quite well. Because it was actually in 2019 when Bitcoin dropped below the 20-week moving average, a couple of months after Total 3 did. In 2019, Total 3 dropped below the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA back in July. But we also know that Bitcoin did not drop below it until September, in late September at that. So then we said, well, I mean, if we follow suit and we see that Total 3 has now dropped below the 20-week SMA back over here in May, then it's likely only a matter of time before Bitcoin follows suit. And it has. Okay, and it has. And it's basically done, it's more or less a tempered version of 2019. Right? I mean, and it almost down, I mean, look, I mean, this move here, this weekly candle that capitulated below was a 20% drop. This one was a 10% drop. But this move was about a 4x move. This move, 2x move. So you basically had twice the rally over here. And then this weekly close below the 20-week was a 20% drop. Whereas this was, again, half the rally as this one. And it was a 10% drop that kicked off sort of that weekly close below the 20-week moving average. So then there does still seem to be some similarities between these cycles. I would say it's a mix of 2019 and 2015. You know, some people say, well, it's more like 2019 than 2015. But then other people say, well, it's more like 2015 than 20. Most people say it's more like 2019 than 2015. But I'd say it's a mix, right? I mean, it's not really either one of them. I mean, you know, this one moved up 4x. This one moved up about 100%, maybe about 90%. So in terms of percentage gain, this here is more similar to this move than this one, right? In terms of percentage gain. And one of the ways that we can visualize that it's sort of a mixture of the two rather than any one, I mean, go look at the year-to-date ROI of 2023 compared to 2019. 2019 vastly outperformed 2023. Look at 2015. 2023 has outperformed 2015. So it was better. It's been better than 2015, but it's been worse than 2019. And what we said before, right? Well, you take the average and we see what we get, right? You take 2015, 2019, average them out, and there you go. I mean, it's a pretty good match. And if we come back down to these lows over here, that puts Bitcoin back at $23,000, right? 23K, which if Bitcoin drops that 11.5%, right? I mean, that puts Bitcoin at 23K. So I still think there's a good chance that Bitcoin will actually visit 23K here in the coming, I mean, it could be the next couple of weeks. It could be a few months. You know, I mean, it's always hard to know the exact path, of course. I mean, even if you say, even if we come out and say, well, we spend half the year going up and half the year going down, and if the expectation is that Bitcoin does spend the second half of the year more or less going down, that doesn't mean that it has to go down this week. And in fact, in 2019, after dropping, we actually just consolidated for a few weeks and then had a pretty big candle back up to the upside that back tested the 20-week, right? So you have this example where total 3 back tested the 20-week moving average, even though there was, tons of bad news right here in the altcoin market, right? Just absolute major sell-off. And then we just sort of rallied back up just to get everyone thinking twice about, hey, I sold they sold their alts. You take out that high, get those people to FOMO back in, only then go back down. And it went back down on the same time, right? I mean, the Bitcoin basically got this weekly close back below the 20-week moving average. So then I guess the question is as well, if this bounce by Bitcoin is what allowed total 3 to bounce back and back test the 20-week moving average, what could possibly allow Bitcoin to back test it itself? Well, I'm glad you asked, right? You go further down the risk curve and you look at something like the S&P 500 and you say, well, if Bitcoin bouncing off the 20-week allowed total 3 to back test the 20-week itself and retest it as resistance, then perhaps, just perhaps, the S&P bouncing off its 20-week moving average will allow Bitcoin to back test its 20-week as resistance. Okay, so the 20-week moving average for the S&P is around 4,300, right? 43.31, 43.32. And so if the S&P falls in here, I mean, it's already sort of at these levels, right? But if the S&P were to bounce off of the 20-week moving average and get like a sizable bounce back up to the upside, then yes, I mean, it could allow Bitcoin to back test this as resistance. So it doesn't have to be this week. I mean, Bitcoin could go down and then sort of retest this maybe a couple of months from now, and then potentially get rejected and come down here, right? There's a chance that happens. But it's interesting how, the further down the risk curve you go, you can find a reason for some of the riskier stuff to bounce, right? So the altcoin market bounced and back tested the 20-week on Bitcoin's bounce. And so perhaps a 20-week bounce on the S&P could allow Bitcoin to sort of retest its own 20-week SMA sometime, in the next 4 to 8 weeks. I have no idea how long it's going to take to retest it. I want to be clear. And I know a lot of people are watching this 2019 move like a hawk and saying, well, hey, it's just going to come down here. We're going to consolidate for a little bit, and then we're going to back test it here in the next couple of weeks. And guys, they could be right. I'm not here to say that they can't be right. But I also know that, in 2015, if you're waiting for a back test, yeah, sure, we back tested it. But after Bitcoin put in a double bottom, right? And you can see here, it actually went slightly lower than this wick over here. So, this candle, by the way, from open to this wick, that was a 37% drop, a 37 to 38% drop. That one weekly candle. So again, if you're waiting for it to back test it, sure, eventually it did after it put in a double bottom. And by that point, we basically just had enough momentum to actually break back above it and actually kick off a more sustained bull run that took us to new all-time highs. Remember, this rally over here, while it doesn't look like much, was still almost a 2x move. You're talking 84%. And from this low here to this high is about a 90% move. It's not that dissimilar from what we saw this year, right? This year is a 100% move, basically. 15.5 or 15.4 up to, 31, 32K. You're talking about a 100% move, maybe slightly more. You can see about a 104% move. That's not that different from what we saw back in 2015 in terms of the percent gain. And over here, we ended up getting a double bottom. So, my sort of expectation is the same. And I say that not to just be annoyingly redundant and just like repetitive and the same thing over and over again. But, we came into the year and we said, guys, look, it's a pre-halving year. And in my own experience in pre-halving years, we wreck both sides, right? You wreck the bulls and you wreck the bears. And the expectation oftentimes is that you go up long enough, or in some cases you could go down first, but in either case, you do something to give one side a false sense of security that they are right and that they will be right for the entirety of the year. And if we go up, that means that people call for new all-time highs. And how many, if you're on Twitter at all, there have been no shortage of people calling for new all-time highs this year or breakouts to 40 to 50K. Again, I know, if you only watch this channel, you might be living in, say, like a bubble, no pun intended, but there are a lot of people out there that have thought and continue to think that Bitcoin is going much higher this year. And I think the reason is because these sorts of moves in pre-halving years, it can give that side a false sense of security, this affirmation, this confirmation that that's all it's going to do for the entirety of the year. Because a lot of people, they're either always bullish or they're always bearish, okay? But in pre-halving years, what history has shown us time and time again is that what Bitcoin tends to do is go up for half the year and then down for half the year. That's what it tends to do. And one way to visualize that is, again, to go look at these monthly tables, these like monthly return tables, and just take a look at like 2011, where you had 5 of the first 6 months were green and then 5 of the last 6 months were red. 2019, 5 of the first 6 months were green, 5 of the last 6 months were red. 2023, 5 of the first 6 months were green. So far, we got June is red and August is red. And if it's going to follow suit like 2019 and 2011, then it means, let's just assume that August closes red, which is probably a safe assumption, but you really never know. That means that either September, October, November, December could be green, right? So one of those 4 months would be green and the rest would be red if it's going to follow suit to the prior pre-halving years of 2011 and 2019. Now, there is 2015, where the second half of the month was mostly green. 5 of the last 6 months were green. But in 2015, you had, 4 of the first 6 months were red. So basically, in all cases, you either have 6 red and 6 green, like in 2 of the prior pre-halving years. And in the other one, you had 7 green and 5 red. But it was always about 6 and 6 plus or minus 1. Right now, we've already had 5 green months. Okay, we've already had 5. So, we'll probably get one more green month at some point between, September through December. One of those will probably be green. Probably not September because you can see it's normally red, but you could get one of those months be green. In fact, in 2019, it was October that was green. In 2011, it was December that was green. So perhaps it would come in Q4, October, November, December, one of those months. It could be sort of like a relief bounce back up to the upside, just to, just so it's not keep people guessing. But again, like that's what we see in pre-halving years is you go one direction long enough to give that side a false sense of security. So in 2011 and 2019, it was up. So the bulls were convinced that they were going to be right for the entirety of the year. And then they got wrecked in the second half. In 2015, it was the bulls who got wrecked first. And then the bears got wrecked for the second half of the year. I'm not going to edit it out, I guess, but so I think that I think that it's been I think our assessments have been fairly good in terms of trying to understand like how the altcoin market can tell us the likely direction of Bitcoin. And I think the reason for that is because a lot of the reasons that Bitcoin will go up at various times is because liquidity is just moving around from the altcoin market to Bitcoin as people flee higher risk stuff and go to lower risk stuff. But the issue, and we've said this before, right, is that at some point there's no longer sufficient liquidity in the altcoin market to support the price of Bitcoin USD at these higher valuations. And so what happens is the Bitcoin then rolls over and then it crushes the altcoin market again, right? And that is the difficult part because the altcoin market lags Bitcoin on the way up and then they sort of get crushed again when Bitcoin goes back down. And Total 3 told us a long time ago that Bitcoin was sort of running out of runway for this, for the uptrend because the altcoin market was just draining, sort of just bleeding. And you need that liquidity to sort of help support the price of these other assets. Because again, one of the reasons why I think that Bitcoin tends to do well in the pre-halving year is just because a lot of people are just converting their altcoins to Bitcoin in preparation for a theoretical bull run coming after the halving, right? So a lot of people say, all right, well, to hell with altcoins, let's just get into Bitcoin and wait for the halving. And so that's one of the reasons why Bitcoin can do pretty well in the pre-halving year. But then at some point, you just run out of liquidity from the altcoin market to really support these valuations for Bitcoin. And so then Bitcoin slowly rolls over, right? It slowly rolls over, like in 2019, like it just slowly rolled over. It kept everyone guessing, right? It kept the bulls thinking they were right, really until September. And even then, they didn't throw in the towel because you got another pump up here in August. And then you came down again in November. And then you still had another rally, and then you came into the recession. That marked the finale of the secondary scare. And so I think we're in the secondary scare right now. I mean, like over here, the secondary scare started here in June, and then it lasted until March. You normally get a secondary scare that kind of wipes everyone out before the real rally begins. It takes you to new highs. Right here, the secondary scare was a 50% drop. So 2 cycles ago, the secondary scare. So 2 cycles ago, the secondary scare was a 49% drop. Last cycle, it was from this high here, it was a 72% drop. Now, if you only take it to this low, right? If you say, well, let's just take it to before the pandemic, it was still a 50% drop, right? So you have this 2 examples here, the last 2 cycles where the secondary scare was a 50% drop. This is what I've said before, right? Like everyone starts talking about the Bitcoin halving, and then what normally happens is the price of Bitcoin halves before the halving, and then people will sort of poke fun at it and say, well, I thought the halving was coming, but they really meant the price of Bitcoin halves. So that's what happened last cycle, and that's what happened 2 cycles ago. Now, last cycle was a bit more brutal because we got a recession. In 2015, we did not get a recession, and so this drawdown from this point here was about a 50% drop. This was about a 50% drop, right? So there was reason to believe that could be it, but then we got a recession, and we came down a lot further, and we actually came down 72%. But let's just say you have a 48% drop or a 53% drop. A 48% drop from this high puts Bitcoin right around 16K. A 53% drop puts it at 14.8K, which would be a new low, in fact. Um, so I still think that, there's a good chance that Bitcoin will spend the second half of the year going down, right? And I mean, I know there's a lot of people out there that are saying, hey, this is not a downtrend because we haven't taken out this low right here, right? This is a low, this is a higher low, right? So there's people holding on to that. But in the same way that Total 3 told us long ago that Bitcoin would likely break the 20-week SMA within the next 2 to 3 months, just like it did in 2019, go take a look at ETH. Bitcoin didn't put in a new low, not yet. A lower low. ETH did. Bitcoin has not. ETH, a lower low. I think ETH is sort of showing what's likely going to happen to Bitcoin. The reason why ETH has already put in a new low and Bitcoin, or a lower low, not a new low, but a lower low, is because, as you know, right, ETH is further along the risk curve. It's riskier than Bitcoin. I don't care what people say. It's riskier than Bitcoin. Okay, it's subject to more regulatory risk. There is not as much liquidity as there is for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is just a safer asset. That doesn't mean that Ethereum is not, a blue chip. I do consider ETH a blue chip, but it's riskier than Bitcoin. And you can see here that ETH put in a lower low and Bitcoin has not, at least not yet. But in the same way that Total 3 told us that Bitcoin would likely fall below the 20-week SMA, give it a couple of months or so, and it did, I think Ethereum is sort of showing us, yeah, eventually Bitcoin will likely go lower. Because again, one of the reasons is because as liquidity leaves the rest of the cryptoverse, there's just no longer that liquidity that can support the price of Bitcoin. Because there's still going to be people that are likely going to go convert their alts to Bitcoin, but you're just not getting nearly as much as you could have a few months ago, right? So like a year ago. I mean, a year ago, if you had gone to say convert your ETH to Bitcoin, you could have gotten, you're converting it at 0.08. Now you're getting 0.06, right? You're not getting as much. If you were doing the same thing with like ADA or DOT, right, or Link or any of these, right? I mean, like in August 2022, ADA was a lot higher than it is today. I believe it was. I mean, I'm trying to remember exactly, but I know it was basically at like 2,000 satoshis. I don't know why it's not showing up on here. Let me pull this up. Yeah, I don't know. These are just kind of zeroed out right now. But I think I changed the scaling on this. I need to go fix this. But the issue is that a lot of these altcoins are just they've just been wrecked in their Bitcoin pairs. They're down a lot. I mean, like just from last summer or August of 2022, right? I mean, like ADA Bitcoin is down 60%, right? DOT Bitcoin from August of 2022. If you take it from over here, right, it's down 57%. And you could just go down the list, right? I mean, like, go take a look at Matic Bitcoin, which I said before, right? It looks like just some massive distribution phase. But again, like, if you take it from like August of 2022, it's down about 50%. So the issue is there's still going to be people out there that convert their alts to Bitcoin. Now, last year when they did that, and even this year, right, when they did that this year, it can support the price of Bitcoin because you're getting a decent amount, right? You're getting a pretty decent conversion on these altcoins to get Bitcoin. But as liquidity continues to drain, you don't get the same purchasing power of your altcoin to go get that Bitcoin. Okay, the purchasing power goes down. And therefore, there's no longer sufficient liquidity in the altcoin market to support the price of Bitcoin USD. Bitcoin rolls over and it crushes the altcoin market again. And if you have been following me for a long time on here, we've been calling for the altcoin reckoning forever. It's during the secondary scare that the altcoin market finally becomes somewhat attractive, but I would argue further along in the secondary scare. I think the secondary scare has only just started here in July. Now, it could be over in a few weeks. Depends on, if we pull a 2015 and drop quickly, then it could be over in a few weeks. But there's some reason to believe it could take longer than that. Bitcoin could sort of bounce around in this area and then bounce back up, back test the 20-week moving average, and then sort of go lower, do something like that, right? There's always a chance that it plays out like that. And if it does, then, we're sort of just constantly guessing, is this is this sort of the final low before the real bull market begins. I will say, normally, this is sort of where you have to deal with, is it a higher low, is it a double bottom, or is it a lower low, and I will say, I think you should be open to all three possibilities, okay? And it's not a cop-out. It's just to say there's no one on here that can possibly tell you what is going to happen. You can look at evidence. I mean, I can look at I can look at several dozen indicators that would tell you why this is probably the low. But I could also find several that would say, yeah, it could be, but there's also a reason that it could theoretically go lower, right? And maybe we'll do a video on some of those. Just most of them have already flashed, but there's still a couple that never did, and so maybe those still need to get triggered. But that's the thing, right? You have to be open-minded to, is it a double bottom, is it a higher low, or is it a lower low? And just for the record, remember last cycle that was a higher low. Okay, last cycle was a higher low. You had a low, then you had a higher low. Cycle before that, it was a double bottom. What is it this cycle? Right? Last cycle, it was a higher low into a recession, but remember, the recession was really short-lived because we just printed $6 trillion. So again, I don't think the Fed's going to print as quickly this time, and therefore you do sort of run the risk of potentially a lower low, but it depends on how aggressive the Fed is, right? Like how much do they mean higher for longer? Are they willing to hold rates there, even in the midst of say, markets struggling, right? So again, sort of to recap, Total 3 told us long ago that Bitcoin was likely going to get this drop in August or September. And one of the reasons we said that Bitcoin gets this drop, if you remember, is actually because of the equity market. It's not necessarily anything crypto specific. It's just to say, if you look at the S&P in pre-election years, right? If we look at the S&P, if we take 2023 and add the average of all prior pre-election years, we tend to get a correction in the August to September timeframe. And guess what? It's that correction in the August to September timeframe that has always led Bitcoin to getting a weekly close below the 20-week SMA in August or September of the pre-halving year. So you get the correction in the stock market in August or September of the pre-election year, which sends Bitcoin below the bull market support band in August or September of the pre-halving year. And then it sort of basically pushes Bitcoin into a downtrend for several months. And then sometime in the halving year, maybe even the latter part of the pre-halving year, but sometime maybe in the early phase of the halving year, Bitcoin then starts to trend back up into the halving and all that good stuff. So that's where I currently think we are. I think we're in the middle of the secondary scare that was brought to you by the S&P 500. I keep going on tangents, but one thing that I've seen a lot of people say is, well, if the S&P sort of bounces here and holds this and then goes to new highs, and that means the Bitcoin's going to go put in a new high itself. Guys, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Well, I don't really, but in 2019, I watched. It was like, what's going on, right? In 2019, the S&P, this orange line here, went and put in new highs, right? Went and put in new highs. Bitcoin still went down. I don't know what to tell you. Bitcoin still went down. Bitcoin did not take out the 2019 high until the end of the halving year, right? So you're talking about, there's a chance that, if that were to play out the same way this cycle, it means that Bitcoin doesn't go to, doesn't really convincingly break into the mid 30Ks until sometime in the halving year, not this year. And it could be the latter part of the halving year for that matter. Because again, here's the example where, you can see this orange line. Let me show you. S&P was going up, putting in new highs. Bitcoin was going down. So that is something I remember, because I remember distinctly in 2019 watching the S&P climb higher even after the uninverted yield curve, and Bitcoin just kept going lower. So if the S&P sort of holds and then pushes higher into Q4, that doesn't necessarily mean Bitcoin's going to. If it falls to 2019, it means it still could go down, right? So we have to be careful, we have to be careful with assuming that Bitcoin follows the S&P, because I mean, you can already see that there's some divergence in the trend. I mean, look at this, right? I mean, really, from May, the S&P was going up, Bitcoin didn't really do much. So just because the S&P goes up doesn't mean that crypto has to, right? Why is that? Well, again, because crypto is more so a function of excess liquidity than anything else. And just sort of the last thing I'll leave you with is this chart that we've actually talked about quite a bit. I'm just going to pull it back up. Just give me a second. So total 3, and then you overlay net liquidity, and let's move it to this pane up here. Let's get rid of the 20-week SMA. And you can kind of see the similarities, right? You can really see the similarities between these two charts. I mean, they follow each other pretty closely, right? And I think the argument here is that the altcoin market is a function of excess liquidity, right? It's just a function of excess liquidity. So if liquidity is going down, then the altcoin market struggles. And liquidity has been going down, right? So the altcoin market has struggled. So just something to think about. And by the way, I mean, if we do back test the 20-week SMA this week, which, by the way, and there's at least some reason to believe that we could revisit it at some point in the coming weeks. Back in 2019, after getting a weekly close down, we then basically didn't do anything. And then the week after that, we had a wick up. So if we do get a wick up to the 20-week, then it basically means going up to 28,200, or if it's a 21-week EMA, it means 27,500. But remember, it doesn't have to repeat 2019. Maybe it'll do something different. Maybe it'll do sort of a combination again of 2015 and 2019, where it doesn't back test it as frequently, but the drops don't have to be nearly as much as they were in a prior cycle. It doesn't mean that ultimately we don't get to the same place, but the path can always be very, very different. So anyways, that's where we'll wrap it up. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on ITC Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.